Hello, this is Alan Brooks, and welcome to another New Discovery teaching. Today we're going to be looking at a secret story on Isaiah 7 through 11. It's about the epic battle of the ages between Emmanuel, Jesus Christ, born of a virgin, and the Assyrian Antichrist. And so we're going to get right into it because sometimes I talk too much before I start the teaching, and I'm trying to change that. So I found that the entire Bible is basically one gigantic mega prophecy about the last 3.5 years, the entire prophetic Bible. And the last 3.5 years starts with an event. It's an event where a northern Antichrist sweeps through the Middle East and invades Saudi Arabia, invades Sunni territories. He's a Shia. And then he's going to, in a surprise, act like he's coming back home, but in a surprise, he's going to invade Israel, and Israel who's living in a peace. As Ezekiel 38:11 says, a peaceful and unsuspecting people Israel will be. And Jeremiah says several times, peace, peace, when there is no peace. Okay, so that's basically, there's a framework for the end of time out throughout the entire Bible, that the last 3.5 years of time starts with that event, that during a false peace, the Antichrist invades the Middle East and then invades Israel. Then he rules for 3.5 years, as Revelation 11:2 says. The Gentiles will trample Jerusalem for 42 months. And then what happens? Then after the tribulation, as Matthew 24 says, the sun, moon, and stars are darkened, and Jesus Christ comes back in the sky, and he destroys this Antichrist. So that's the timeline. That's the framework that the entire Bible has. We can't go into all of them, but it has it. So we see this hidden story in Isaiah 7 through 11, which we've all learned is about Jesus Christ, the Messiah, being born of a virgin, and unto us a child is born, and all that stuff that we sing in Christmas. You know, the government will be upon his shoulders. And yes, that story's there. So let's go right to Isaiah 7. Isaiah 7:14 says, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. And we all know that. And then it switches gears at verse 18. It says, in that day the Lord will whistle for flies from the Nile Delta in Egypt, and for bees from the land of Assyria. Verse 19, they will all come and settle in the steep ravines and in the crevices and the rocks, and all the thorn bushes and all the water holes. Verse 20, in that day the Lord will use a razor hired from beyond the river Euphrates, the king of Assyria, to shave your heads and your private parts. So, that's basically a picture. In that day, all throughout the Bible, in that day means the day of the Lord, or the end of time. Or as Jeremiah 30 verses 6 and 7 says, it says, in that day it will be a time of Jacob's trouble. And it's always accepted that the time of Jacob's trouble is the last 3.5 years' time, or, as Jesus said, the greatest time the distress the world has ever known. So here we see the Antichrist identified as an Assyrian. So where is Assyria? Assyria is the areas northeast of Israel, but is now occupied by, say, northern Jordan, Iraq, Iran, and those territories, some of Turkey, basically those types of areas of the Middle East. And so the Bible says from somewhere around there, the Assyrian's going to come, and he is the Antichrist. We know this from many other scriptures. Daniel 11 talks about how that a northern Antichrist will sweep through the Middle East in Daniel 11:29 through 45, and he'll invade the southern states of Egypt and other countries around there, and then he'll act like he's coming back home. And then in a surprise, he'll invade Israel. Now, Isaiah 8:8, the very next chapter, refers back to Emmanuel. It goes basically, verse 7 and 8. It says, the king of Assyria with all his pomp, it will overflow on all its channels and run all its banks and sweep into Judah, swirling over it, passing through it, and reaching up to the neck. Its outspread wings will cover the breadth of your land, Emmanuel. So we can see Isaiah 7 talked about Emmanuel will give birth to a virgin, then from a virgin, and then Isaiah 7:20 talked about in that day God's going to send for the king of Assyria. He'll shave your head. And an interesting coincidence, Psalm 52 talks about the Antichrist using a razor or as a razor who has a deceitful tongue. Okay, so this starts the last 3.5 years. We know that throughout the entire Bible, the Antichrist invades Israel. Jesus says, flee, Israel, get out of town, fast, don't even get your stuff out of your house. Why? Because Muslim armies hate the Jews. They'll kill even pregnant women. They'll rip them open, as Hosea 13:16 says. And this will be the time of Jacob's trouble, a really bad time for Israel. And it'll also be, at the end of it, as Matthew 24 says, the sun, moon, and stars will be darkened as Jesus Christ starts to come back, which means it's going to be dark, people. And we see that alluded to at the end of Isaiah 8. It talks about that, it says, verse 21, distressed and hungry. They will roam throughout the land. When they are famished, they will become enraged, and looking upwards will curse their God and their King. Verse 22, they will look towards the earth and see only distress and darkness and fearful gloom, and they will be thrust into utter darkness. Well, that's a picture of the at the end of the last 3.5 years, or after the tribulation, as Matthew 24 says, the sun, moon, and stars will be darkened. Picture it. It'll be the time of great distress, Jesus says. The great tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble. And it says that very word in verse 21, distressed and hungry. Well, why will people be hungry? Because during this last 3.5 years, Revelation 11 talks about two prophets prophesying and causing judgments to fall on the earth. And it won't rain for the last 3.5 years, which will cause famine and people to be thirsty and hungry. And so they're going to be mad when in the midst of all this darkness, and they look at the earth and they see gloom and distress and darkness. But when they look up, they're going to see Jesus Christ coming back in the sky, and they're going to curse at him. They're going to curse at their God and King, which another chapter we're going to look at in a minute reiterates the same prophecy, which again, that's my theory, that the same Bible uses the same words and phrases to say the same predictions over and over again in what I call movie flashbacks. So we see a picture in Isaiah 7 and 8 that the Assyrian Antichrist is called to come in that day or at the end of time. And then at the end of Isaiah 8, the people are looking in gloom and they're looking in darkness and distress at the earth, and they'll look up at the returning Jesus and they're going to curse God. Why? Because Muslims hate Jesus. They say they love him, but they really don't. And then Isaiah 9 picks up the story. Verse 1, nevertheless, there will be no more gloom for those who were in distress. So you see how it says, Isaiah 8, at the end, it says there's gloom in the land, and then Isaiah 9 says there's going to be no more gloom, for you were in distress, or the time of great distress. But in the future, God will honor Galilee of the nations by the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. Verse 2, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. So what is that? This darkness of the end of time, after the tribulation, the sun, moon, and stars are darkened, there's gloom, but the people in gloom will suddenly see a great light. That's Jesus Christ streaking across the sky, the darkened sky, or as Isaiah 60 says, arise, shine, for your light has come. Deep darkness covers the earth. It's the same prophecy. So again, it talks about Jesus Christ coming back in the darkness. He comes back and he breaks the yoke of the Antichrist. He enlarges the nation. That's what verse 3 and verse 4 says. He takes care of the rod of their oppressor. And the Antichrist is called a rod in Isaiah 10. And then verse 5 is amazing. In Isaiah 9, it says, every warrior's boot used in battle, every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. Well, if that sounds familiar, it is, because it's a parallel verse with Ezekiel 39. Ezekiel 39 talks about after Armageddon, they're going to burn the weapons of Armageddon armies for fuel. And how and why did all this happen? How and why did a streaking light come across the sky in the midst of darkness and distress of the last end times? Verse 6 answers, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace. Verse 7, of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no more end. There will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing it and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. So, we've taught all of our lives and sung this song, the government will be upon his shoulders. Well, maybe spiritually, it's from 2,000 years ago, but it will in fact be upon his shoulders from this time forward, after Armageddon, after Jesus Christ, the child Savior, comes back streaking across the dark sky. Then the government will be upon his shoulders. Then the key of David is on his shoulders, as Revelation 3:7 says in a matching text. So we see how this is an amazing text about Jesus Christ coming back in the dark sky in Isaiah 9. Now let's pick up at verse 18. This again refers to Jesus Christ coming back. And we'll see this in the next chapter. It says, "Surely wickedness burns like a fire. It consumes briars and thorns. It sets the forest thickets ablaze, so that it rolls upward in a column of smoke." Verse 19, "By the wrath of the Lord Almighty, the land will be scorched, and the people will be fuel for the fire. They will not spare one another." And this is a consistent picture. In many texts about Armageddon, it talks about brother will be against brother. They will fight one another and destroy one another. In some gigantic cataclysmic event at Armageddon, they're going to look up. You see, Armageddon isn't the armies fighting one another particularly. It's they look up to gather together for the battle against Jesus Christ. That's what one text says. I can't remember it right now because I'm a little dyslexic right now and I have a headache. But anyway, they gather together for the battle of the great day Almighty, and they gather together to battle against Jesus Christ. And so, but Jesus Christ comes back in the sky in the darkness. Imagine you're a Muslim and you've ruled over Israel for the last 3.5 years, and you've killed the 2 prophets finally, as Revelation 11 says will happen. The whole world rejoices, the Bible says. They give gifts. They make merry, which, could be. Jesus Christ would come back on Christmas. Wouldn't that be ironic? The whole world is rejoicing, and all of a sudden, the sun, moon, and stars are completely dark. Man, talk about freak out time. People are going to freak out. They're going to look, as the end of Isaiah 8 says, they're going to look at the land, and they're going to be full of distress and gloom. They're going to look up and see Jesus Christ coming back, and they're going to curse at him. And we're going to see that prophecy reiterated in just a minute. So anyway, we see this happening. Jesus Christ coming back in the darkness in Isaiah 9. He burns up everybody. And we're going to see that referred to here in Isaiah 10. At the end of Isaiah 10, Jesus Christ comes back as a flame, and he burns down the trees, just like we saw there. He's going to burn down the people at the Battle of Armageddon. And, Jesus Christ lays waste to the earth, it says in Isaiah, I think, 25. So we're going to see that this prophecy is basically repeated. We saw Isaiah 7 about the Assyrian Antichrist. Isaiah 8, that's repeated, 8:8. In that day I'm going to send for the Assyrian to come against your land, Emmanuel. And then Isaiah 10, verse 5, "Woe to the Assyrian, the rod of my anger, in whose hand is the club of my wrath. I send him against a godless nation. I dispatch him against a people who anger me, to seize loot, to snatch plunder, and to trample them down in the mud like mud in the streets." Well, it says in Luke 21, it says, "The Gentiles will trample Jerusalem till the times of the Gentiles are finished." Now, I know a lot of experts say that is 2,000 years ago in AD 70, but I don't think so. It has to be about the future because, Revelation 11 says that the Gentiles will trample the same people, Jerusalem, the same city, for the last 3.5 years. Here it says again that I am going to send this Assyrian rod to seize loot and to snatch plunder, to trample Israel down like mud in the streets. But this is not what he intends, says verse 7. This is not what he has in mind. His purpose is to destroy, to put an end to many nations. And so that's exactly what the Antichrist wants to do. He wants to destroy a lot of nations, and he wants to set up an Islamic Shia caliphate. But then verse 12 says, "When the Lord has finished all of his work against Mount Zion and Jerusalem, the Lord will say, I will now punish the king of Assyria for the willful pride of his heart and the haughty look in his eyes. For he says, verse 13, by the strength of my hand I've done all this. By my wisdom, because of my understanding, I've removed the boundaries of nations. I have plundered their treasuries. Like a mighty one, I subdued their kings. So, basically, this Antichrist is going to have a lot of pride. It says that in Daniel. He's got more pride than anybody in the history of the world. He's going to speak against, so much so that he's going to speak against God. And then verse 17 of Isaiah 10 says, the light of Israel will become a fire, the Holy One a flame, and in a single day it will burn and consume his thorn and briars. So, the splendor of his forest and fertile fields it will completely destroy, verse 18. You see, we just saw that in the last chapter. It talks about when Jesus Christ comes back, he's going to be burning up people. And this reiterates that same prophecy here. And people, a lot of experts and scholars and commentaries say, well, Isaiah 10 happened a long time ago, so it has nothing to do with the future. But, I don't think the light of Israel became a fire, the Holy One a flame, as verse 17 says, 2,500 years ago. Do you? This is about the future, because it also talks about this Assyrian guy in Isaiah 7 and 8, talked about in that day or at the end of time. The Assyrian will come against Israel. And then another end time aspect is in verse 20. In that day, the remnant of Israel, the survivors of Jacob, will no longer rely on him, the Assyrian Antichrist, who struck them down, but will then truly rely on the Lord, the Holy One of Israel. Verse 21, a remnant will return. A remnant of Jacob will return. You see what I'm saying, people? This is talking about the end of time, which when Jesus Christ comes back like a fire, then a remnant will come back. It says that many, many times throughout the Old Testament. You see what I'm saying? So again, verse 24, my people who live in Zion, do not be afraid of the Assyrians who beat you with a rod, the Antichrist being that rod, or a razor, as he's called in many places. Very soon, verse 25, my anger against you will end, and my wrath will be directed to their destruction. It says that also many places in the Bible, like Isaiah, I believe 50, it says, the people who laid you waste, now I'm going to dispatch them out of Israel. Or Isaiah 14:25, it goes, I will crush the Assyrian in my land, and on my mountains I will crush him underfoot. That's the Allen Brooks, translation, because I don't have it in front of me. Anyway, verse 26, then the Lord Almighty will lash them with a whip, and so verse 27, in that day their burden will be lifted from your shoulders, the yoke from your neck. The yoke will be broken because you have grown so fat. Anyway, that's talking about the Lord Jesus Christ coming back and breaking this yoke of Midian, like Midian upon Israel. The Antichrist yoke has been upon their shoulders. He will come back and break it. He will come back like a fire. And then verse 33 verse 32 to 34 really has an amazing prophecy. It goes, this day they will halt at Nob. They will shake their fist at the mount of the daughter of Zion, the hill of Jerusalem. So again, remember we saw that picture at the end of Isaiah 8? The people will look down at the land, they'll see darkness and distress and gloom. And then they look up and they'll curse their God and their king. This is a reiteration or a movie flashback of that same prophecy. They will halt at Nob. Nob is the Mount of Olives, people. And they will shake their fist, just like we saw that verse I just read to you from Isaiah 8. And then, why will they shake their fist? Because Jesus Christ is coming back like a flame. Verse 33, see the Lord Almighty, will lop off the boughs with great powers. With great power, the lofty trees will be felled, and the tall ones will be brought low. He will cut down the forest thickets with an axe. Lebanon will fall before the mighty one. This is Jesus Christ coming back in fire and in power, just like we saw in Isaiah 9. And you see how all these are tied. There was an Assyrian mentioned in Isaiah 7 and 8, and Jesus Christ coming back in Isaiah 9. And then the Assyrian and Jesus Christ coming back is mentioned again here in Isaiah 10. And so after Jesus Christ comes back, what event would we expect next? We would expect the Millennium to happen and Jesus Christ to reign. And that's exactly what the next chapter speaks about. It talks about Isaiah 11, a shoot will come up from the stump of Jesse. From his roots a branch will bear fruit. Verse 2, the Spirit of the Lord will rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, of counsel and of might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord, and he will delight in the fear of the Lord. That's Jesus Christ. He's a branch in many places in Isaiah. He's going to come back with all this wisdom and counsel, and he's going to judge people fairly. Verse 3, he will not judge by what he sees with his eyes, nor decide what he hears with his ears, but with righteousness he will judge the needy. And so when Jesus Christ comes back, he's going to judge things. That's what the book of Revelation speaks about, right? And then verse 4, he will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. With the breath of his lips he will slay the wicked. Righteousness will be his belt, and faithfulness the sash around his waist. That is exactly like Revelation 19, I believe it says. It talks about Jesus dresses in the garments of his return. He has a golden sash around his waist, and he wears the belt of righteousness. Now, isn't that amazing how it's part of my theory that the same God uses the same words and phrases to describe the same events in the same Bible. This is all one integrated mega prophecy. And then verse 6, the wolf will lie with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, and a little child will lead them. The same little child from Isaiah 7, Emmanuel, who was born a virgin. The same little child of Isaiah 9, who unto us a child was born, who became the Prince of Peace. Now he will lead them. You see how this is all a secret story between Isaiah 7 and 11 about the end of time, when the Assyrian's going to come against Israel. He's going to cause the land to be darkness at the end. Then Jesus Christ is going to become a flame and destroy this Assyrian, and he's going to lead the people. He's going to be that little child from Isaiah 7 and 9. And then and the rest of Isaiah 11 is really speaking about the millennium. It says, verse 9, for the whole earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord. That matches Isaiah 2. Verse 10, in that day the root of Jesse will stand as a banner for the peoples, the nations to rally to him, and his resting place will be glorious. In that day, verse 11, the Lord will reach out his hand a second time to reclaim the surviving remnant of his people from Assyria. So again, what does this mean? The root of Jesse standing as a banner. Well, that's Jesus Christ returning like a flag banner in the sky. It talks about that in Isaiah 5. He comes, stands as a banner. He whistles for those from the ends of the earth. Matthew 24 matches. Jesus Christ comes and stands in the sky. A trumpet happens, and he sends his angel to gather the elect from the ends of the earth. Here, a banner stands in the sky, and everybody rallies to him. And then, it's the movie flashback to him coming back. And then the rest of Isaiah 11, and we talked about, is the millennium. And verse 12 reiterates it. In another movie flashback, he will raise a banner for the nations. He will gather the exiles of Israel. He will assemble the scattered people of Judah from the four quarters of the earth. The rapture happens after the tribulation. Now, I'm not speaking against a pre-trib. I'm rooting for it, okay? But in Matthew 24, it goes after the tribulation. The angels are sent out to gather the elect from the four corners of the earth. And here, the banner stands up in the sky, who is Jesus. He's going to gather the scattered people of Judah, or the Christians, I believe, from the four quarters of the earth. Now, isn't that amazing how Isaiah 7 through 11 has a secret story about the Assyrian Antichrist and his epic battle with Jesus Christ, or Emmanuel's land, and how at the end of time, Jesus Christ will win that battle after he's brought the Assyrian against his land. He's going to become a flame that's going to streak across the dark sky in the gloomy situation, as Isaiah 9, 1 and 2 says, and he's going to be then the Prince of Peace, and from that time forward, the government will be upon his shoulders, and he will be the everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace, mighty God. From that time forward, the key of David, the government will be upon his shoulders, as Revelation 3 says. 3:7, And then the wolf will lie with the lamb, and he will be represented as that little child will lead us in the millennium. So Isaiah 7 through 11 has an amazing secret story you probably never heard before. This is Alan Brooks. If you want to email me with any questions, abrook8@aol.com, no S, the number 8. And this is Alan Brooks signing out for another New Discovery teaching, The Secret Story of Isaiah 7 through 11.